This is Beyond the Big Screen Podcast with your host, Steve Guerra.
Thank you again for listening to Beyond the Big Screen Podcast. We are a member of the Parthenon Podcast Network. A huge thanks goes out to Erik, yet again, of the Reconsider Podcast. Links to learn more about Erik and Reconsider can be found at reconsidermedia.org or in the show notes. You can now support the Beyond the Big Screen Podcast on Patreon and Subscribestar. By joining Patreon and Subscribestar, you are becoming a part of the team that helps keep this whole project going, and you get many great benefits. Go to patreon.com/Beyond the Big Screen or subscribestar.com/Beyond the Big Screen to learn more. Yet another great way to support Beyond the Big Screen is to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. These ratings and reviews really help me know what you think of the show and help other people learn about Beyond the Big Screen. More about Parthenon Podcast Network can be found at parthenonpodcast.com. You can learn more about Beyond the Big Screen, great movies and stories so great they should be movies, on various social media platforms by searching for A to Z History. Links to all of this and much, much more can be found at beyondthebigscreen.com. I thank you very much for joining me Beyond the Big Screen. I am very excited to welcome back Erik Fogg of the Reconsider Podcast to talk about the 2012 cult classic Dredd. Erik, how are you doing?
Well, I'm better now because I'm talking about one of my favorite movies of all time, Dredd.
People are in for a rare treat today.
Look, last thing we put out was on Prometheus. You got to hear Erik and Steve rant about how crap a movie it was, and we're just going to totally flip it on its head and talk about how masterfully this bad boy is put together.
So this movie, it stars Karl Urban, Olivia Thirlby, Lena Headey, and Domhnall Gleeson, he was magnificent in it, but we'll get to that. Let's slow down. It's based on the comic book Judge Dredd, and there's no connection to the 1995 Stallone movie Judge Dredd. I personally like Judge Dredd, but it's a very different movie, and they're not sequels or prequels in any way. Now, as always, we feature plenty of spoilers. That's what we're on with. That's what we're here for. You can listen to this episode and learn a lot about the movie, having never watched it. And you'll definitely want to watch this movie and listen to this episode several times. I guarantee it. You will love it. We definitely would love to hear what you have to think about this movie. So reach out to us on social media, send an email, whatever you want to do. The very high flyover of the basic setting of the movie is it takes place in a dystopian future where the Earth has been irradiated and most of the planet's been left uninhabitable. 800-ish million people are jammed into what's called Mega City 1, which is basically the northern half of the East Coast of the United States. And this city has what you might call a crime problem. The city's police force is the judges, and the judges are more than just law enforcement. They are the law. Should we say that in Stallone style?
Yeah. I am the law. Yeah, exactly.
And they really are. They are the law. And this movie, it brings up so many different issues. And Erik, where should we start? I'll put that on you. I can't decide.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things to emphasize in terms of the setup for this movie that makes some of the morality of the Judge Dredd universe and so interesting, I'll get to another point in a sec, is that at the very beginning of the movie, when Karl Urban Dredd is training Olivia Thirlby Anderson, so this is Dredd and Anderson, these are the two main characters. When he's starting to train her, he says, we get like a million reports a day or something, and we can respond to no more than 6% of them, right? And so they can't even 94% of crime, they're just like, nope, can't even do anything about it. And the crime is brutal. This isn't the stuff that actually gets reported is the stuff that's bad enough to get reported. So there's a lot more crime beyond that that's not getting reported. So what that means is this is an extreme version of a society that's gone very, that's gone bad. And what he talks about is Mega City is it's cramped, it's poor, it's basically a powder keg. And And so one of the big questions that is often being explored is this question of like liberty and political rights. And like, at what point do they erode, right? At what point is it worth it to get rid of them? And we'll talk about that in a sec. But the other thing to note here is a lot of the stuff, like this movie is so faithful to the basics of Judge Dredd. Because Judge Dredd, like the comic book, gets weird. There's all sorts of like irradiated monsters and like supervillains and stuff like that. This is the basics. This is like, it's all humans. It's just like exploring the society. But it's very faithful to that. So a lot of what we'll be talking about is the mastery of the film. A lot of what we'll be talking about is the Judge Dredd universe and decisions made in the Judge Dredd universe that got translated to the movie, one of which is the city has a bit of a crime problem.
And I thought that it was really cool how they laid that out in front, that it only answers 6,000 or 6% out of just an astronomical amount of calls that they get. Yeah. Most of the movie is actually set inside of one location. They have these tower blocks that are basically cities inside of cities. There's a cool chase scene where we kind of learn a little bit about Dredd right up in the front and who these judges are. And how would you describe their law enforcement technique?
Yeah, so the judges are the reason they are the law is they are judge, jury, and executioner, and police. So basically what happened in this society where crime went through the roof is, they basically said some rights and some like liberties are worth eliminating in order to improve as much as we can our ability to give people the right to be safe from crime. And so we're going to give total dictatorial power to these judges, and these judges have to be qualified, but they are ruthless, they are merciless, and what happens is the megacity sends them out to deal with crimes, and they get total authority. It's like James Bond's License to Kill. They have that license to sentence someone on the spot. And so there's very much a who watches the Watchmen question, because these folks have, these judges have so much power, and so little oversight that this is the dystopian part. The dystopian part is not that the world is irradiated. The dystopian part is the way that the world decided to respond to, or Mega City 1 decided to respond to its mega crime problem, which is give certain people total authority over individual life and liberty, to dispense with both of those as they see fit.
The little bit of the exposition that they get to before we go to the Peachtree Tower where everything really unfolds is that Dredd is teamed up with she's a washout from the judge program, but they're giving her one more shot because she has psychic abilities. And they set up just a little bit that the training process is pretty brutal. It almost sounds like a Spartan type situation. They take these people who seem like they might be judge material when they're children. They raise them to be judges, and you either pass or you fail. I think they said that she had failed by 3 points, and he's like, well, she failed. There's no recuperation process or retraining process. You fail, you're out. So that's kind of what Dredd is getting set up with. So really that's the chief of the judges is giving recruit Anderson to Dredd, and this is basically her ride along. He's her training officer for the day, and if she makes it through a shift, he throws out another statistic that a certain percentage of judges die on their first tour, on their very first day on the job. So yeah. And you know what I loved about this is it's set up, it's just a regular day for them. This is nothing special. Like, we'll go through this whole movie of high drama. That's a day in the life of a judge.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost, yeah. I mean, Carl Urban does such a good job with it. I really love the casting choice because, Sylvester Stallone in the original Judge Dredd was so melodramatic. And it didn't feel faithful to the comics. Whereas, yeah, Dredd he's very principled. There's stuff that incenses him. But responding to crime is not one of those things. He has this sense of like regularity about him. that like, okay, like it's a job. Like you and I think about going to our job every day, and like this guy goes to war every day. And he's like cool as a cucumber about it. And he also has Dredd has this sense of inevitability. It's one of the things that really makes him a fun character, is that he believes that everything he wants to will into the world is inevitable. And he actually struggles a lot when that doesn't happen, because he doesn't know how to deal with when he does something and he doesn't get what he wants out of it. And the thing that's interesting about Dredd is that like he's just a little short of being a fully rounded out character, because like we don't really know anything about him other than he wants to impose merciless justice on people who do bad. And we see that throughout the movie, that he's a very limited person. And we actually see that in contrast with all the people around him, the chief of police and also Anderson. And I'm going to skip around a little bit in some of our notes here, but like one of the ways that we see that is that like Judge's mindset is so totalitarian that, when they're fighting their way up peach trees and we don't have to go through the whole plot of the movie, but like they're going after Mama, who she's running she basically owns peach trees now. She's the mob boss of this tower. She runs the whole thing, and she's selling this drug called slow-mo, which is really bad for people. And she runs with a brutal fist. And so they go into the tower to investigate this murder. They learn it's Mama, and they're going up after her. And Mama sends her thugs after the judges. And at some point, they shoot and dispense with these thugs, and there's one guy who survived. And Anderson, Thurby, is pointing her gun at this guy's head, and he looks at her and he goes, "Why are you hesitating? He's guilty of attempted murder of a judge. The sentence is death." Right. And she, with her psychic mind, is able to see that like this guy is a real person with like a wife and kids. She actually later meets the wife and realizes that she's the one. And that's why she hesitates, because she represents humanity and mercy, which is something that, like, to your point about this just being every day for Dredd, right? Just seeing the worst of humanity every single day, that he's just become a machine. And like, you can get really into like the interesting psychology of it. And that's the thing that makes him a real character, is he's clearly been damaged and scarred by his job, trying to make the tiniest little dent in this hellscape of a city, and it being endless, right? We talk about like there's this idea of going postal, right? People who work with mail too much because it is endless, because they can never feel like they're making progress. They go crazy sometimes, every now and then they would go crazy and start shooting people. Imagine if your thing was fighting crime and like putting your life on the line every single day, and it never, ever, ever gets better, only gets worse. And so like Dredd has this like defense mechanism of absolute merciless and hardness. And this rookie paints this incredible contrast to show us that, we're not dealing with caricatures. We're dealing with a real person who is like very damaged by his world.
You know what I found so incredible about this movie is I saw it for the first time probably not too long after it was released in 2012, and then I watched it maybe once or twice since then, and then watching it again in the last few weeks to now in 2021, it really does grow. I enjoyed it in a specific way back in the early 2010s, but now I think so much of it, you can connect with it, that there's so many police departments in the US since in the last few years where they've been cut, or where things have, the priorities of policing have changed. I was listening to a podcast with a Seattle police officer where they're getting to the point where they don't answer 100% of the calls that come in. I live in Austin. That's the point. There's certain calls that they're not going to answer, and the police really only go to calls. They're not going to the getting the cat out of the tree calls anymore. They're going to fatal accidents, shootings in progress, only crimes that are absolute red alerts now in a lot of police departments across the US. And what does that play with the psychology? It's burning people out. or it's making them compartmentalize where they're not seeing the people who they deal with as they're not Officer Krupke who's walking around the street and he knows who the punks are. He knows who the good kids are. And he knows that there's a shade of gray that some of the punks are good kids or come from good families. And
That's a really good point.
It's a totally different world in where you're in Judge Dredd world, where you are just answering the worst of the worst.
Yeah. It's actually, this is like, we get to have this almost like Reconsider moment here where we could see the Dredd world as a hyperbole of part of what's happened to the US police forces, where, they've also, in response to, like this all kind of started in like 1992 with the big shootout in LA when SWAT was totally unprepared. And a few other times where like one guy with a gun, took out like 18 cops or something, that the cops had become more militarized as they and their both their gear and their tactics have become more military because they feel like they've been facing harder core situations and they're trying to protect themselves. But there's like this vicious cycle where they become more brutal in their approach because they're being trained to see the people that they're dealing with as, and because of the exposure that they have, like, because they're not going to help Mrs. McGillicuddy with her cat, more and more and more of their interactions are with some of these more like hardcore violent and mostly just dangerous to their, some portion of their life is like very dangerous. And so they develop this mindset of, I'm always in danger and the person in front of me is a target, right? Not a human. And so that disconnect or that what's it? Like mental, to your point, compartmentalization, right? Like compartmentalizing certain people as like, these are targets, they are criminals. And like, and I have to like treat them in a certain way to keep myself safe and keep my colleagues safe. And that usually means being very ready to do violence, right? We see that in hyperbole in the Judge world because it's so bad there. And so I love the contrast between like the hardened veteran who's like lost all of his soul and this person who is literally psychic. And so she's like the most empathetic person you can imagine because she can immediately understand everyone that she interacts with. And their tension early on is really, really palpable. And it's a problem for Judge Dredd. He does not like it, right? He's like, do your job, kill this guy, right? And she does.
And now, a brief word from our sponsors. You know who was a great dichotomy to Dredd was the medic who worked in the block. He was the sort of the doctor of the block, and he had an office. And when in the initial scene where the call that Dredd and Anderson are going to was 3 people were thrown off of these tower blocks are mega skyscrapers, and they threw them through the atrium through the bottom. So there's 3 dead bodies at the bottom of this atrium. They go in, and this medic, who I would assume he's some sort of government employee attached to this. I'll just make the assumption he's wearing a uniform. He knows everything. He says these guys live in section C on this floor, and Ma does this and Ma does that. And I think he was almost giving us like what an effective policeman would, even though he wasn't even a law enforcement of any sort, but he had his ear to the ground. He knew the things. Judge Dredd's just coming in here. I'm going to sort this mess out, kill who needs to be killed, and then I'm just going to go to my next call.
I'm going to bounce.
And everybody else will be left picking up the pieces. And really, that's the end of the story anyways, is that the whole place it's bombed. That I love that scene where they take 3 Gatling guns to try and kill Dredd and Anderson, and they just shred like 5 stories of this entirely Swiss cheese, 5 stories of this tower block. I mean, who knows how many people were killed. Right. And after Judge Dredd leaves, he's going to file his report, and tomorrow he'll be on to his next thing.
Yeah. You actually brought up something. I want to like talk about some of the master craft work in this movie, because it's so unexpectedly good. Because like if I told you like, hey, there's this movie about this guy who's just like he's just a like Terminator style juggernaut, and he's going to just like go deal with crime. And what's going to happen is he's going to be like thrown at some thugs, and then he kills them, and then more, and he kills them, and more, and he kills them. And he just moves his way up, and then he kills the bad guy. And you'd be like, that is the most boring tried story ever. And our director knows that's exactly what he's dealing with. And part of the genius of the film is taking this thing that you very, very much expect, right? There are not major twists in this movie. So you take this thing that you very, very much expect, but you make it make sense rather than be boring. It's not like a video game where it's just like, oh, okay, you're going to deal with one batch of bad guys at a time. And at the end, you deal with the big bad boss and it's a big bad fight, right? What happens is the way Mama escalates is rational. She escalates with Judge Dredd rationally. And like, if you think about all of her moves, you're like, yeah, it makes sense, right? At some point, after he's dispensed with some of the thugs, she's like, I'm sending everyone, right? And I'm going to like, and try to find this guy and corner him. And then she like literally traps him and he gets out. And, and what she realizes at some point is that, the literal architecture of the place does not allow her to surround him in an effective way. Because like there are all these like little corners he can get around, and he's not afraid to, he's willing to hide, right? He's not dumb. He's really smart. He sets up traps for like the big mobs coming after him, right? That and then he sets a bunch of them on fire with basically this bomb that he shoots, right? And so she's like, okay, sending like the mob after him. He's too smart for the mob. He's one step ahead. So what are we going to do? We're just going to pull out literally the biggest guns we have. And we need to end this as fast as we can. So we're just going to mow down 5 stories and we're totally going to take out the judge. And of course they fail because that's the way the movie has to go. But like her escalation all makes sense. And the other thing I love is that, unlike this video game, there's literally like a cyberpunk video game that's come out called The Ascent, where you're ascending up this tower and you're fighting harder and harder and harder people as you go. What actually happens is at some point that doesn't happen. The Gatling guns are the best that Mama can throw at him. It's like, what do I do at this point? She calls the next thing she does, she calls other judges, right? She's like, okay, there's 1 or 2 judges I need to take out here. Let's send 4 evil, like bad, corrupt judges. They'll take him out, right? Okay, it makes sense. I tried to handle this on my own, but then I have to play a card that like is very expensive and very difficult for me to play, right? It's a rational escalation. She brings in the bad guy judges. And of course he dispenses with them in this. Actually, he doesn't in the end. He kills 2 of them, and then Anderson ends up killing 2 of them. But just to kind of summarize the end of it, when he gets to the top, all of the bad guys are gone. There's no one left. And so you don't have a big epic showdown boss battle, right? And Mama even like tries to have this, like, she tries to like, she's got her fail safe where like, if her heartbeat goes out, the entire city block blows up or the entire building blows up. You are not getting away. So he just shoots her in the leg and throws her off the building because he's like, oh, the sensor for her heartbeat that would make it blow up, it's probably going to be too far through too much concrete. And he happens to be right. He's totally willing to take out the entire building to take this person down. He's willing to roll those dice, which tells us something about him. But anyway, the point is at the end, like, you don't have this big climactic boss battle because of course Mama has thrown everything she already has at him. She's out of options. And so you just have this like truncated villain monologue and then he chucks her off and it's over. And the work, like the climax is not a big fight. The fighting's already been done. I just love the way that like the story, every step of it makes sense that is how these two warriors would interact with you.
I loved Mama. I think that she is one of the best characters I've ever seen in sci-fi. That, she's been horrifically scarred. She's been through trauma, probably some sort of sexual trauma.
Like very, very clearly sexual trauma. She bites a guy's genitals off.
Yeah. So she has, but there's you can tell that underneath there's some level of sweetness to her, that she's just a person who's been born in a meat grinder and been through it, and she's risen to the top. She has something in her that a ruthlessness that literally got her to the top of this crime organization, but she's not purely evil. I think you want to see, and I think she was honestly in her own way, they were doing some sort of good in that block. There was some level of order, and that kind of ties us into that these gangs are providing the order that the civil society is completely incapable of supplying.
Yeah, that's actually, it's one of the really interesting questions. One of the things I wrote in the notes is like there's this like almost Vietnam hill taking cycle to it, because what had happened was Mama had taken out the other 3 rival gangs, and now there's peace in peach trees as long as you follow Mama's orders, right? And like the number of people that need to be killed are limited compared to the past when there was anarchy. And you don't see that anarchy, but we can put it together with there's 4 gangs in peach trees. There's a lot more war than with 1, right? This is like Pax Romana, right? Hegemonic peace. And so she's brought stability to peach trees. And if we think about if we think about like the structural, like almost geopolitics of this city, Dredd has taken out the top dog and then he just leaves, right? There's nothing. He just creates a power vacuum. So what's going to happen next, right? It isn't going to be rainbows and butterflies at peach trees. There's going to be a power scramble because someone has to hold power. Someone has to enforce order. And who's going to be that? Who knows, right? There's no answer to that question. And so like there is this like bleakness to the ending. To your point, he moves on to his next thing when it's over, and that endlessness of that just endless cycle, and that like reactivity, and that it's so hard for us to imagine that like we can't fix something, right? That we just have to like try to find a way to deal with this awfulness, and just keep trying to deal, and just put out fires or like play whack-a-mole forever, and it will never ever get better. It'll just be like this over and over and over again. That is the reality of like the Dredd universe always. And I think there's like every other sci-fi, even with dystopias, right? There's this like hope that you can fix it, right? Like in V for Vendetta or even 1984, even when they fail, like there's a head of the snake that you can cut off, right? Or like in Star Wars, right? You kill the Emperor and you blow up the Death Star. Great, right? Like now you can have the Republic rise. There isn't that in Judge Dredd. There's no bad guy, right? There's just a hopeless situation. And it's so dark.
Yeah, because you think of even the regular person, a lot of the people that first round that she just basically called the militia out, and it was just regular people, and they had no way out. You're not going to go to law school on a scholarship and somehow wind up, maybe you'll move up a couple of floors into a slightly nicer, terrible apartment. There's no end in sight. And chances are, if something really bad happens to you, you're going to call and no judge is ever going to show up.
Exactly. Whereas Mama's mob will, because Mama demands order. Right. And even these thugs, they get humanized very briefly. Right. They look tough. They look mean. And, and Judge Dredd kills them all. But then we find out one of them has a wife and kids. And you realize if you think about it, they don't have a choice. Right. Like if Mama's gang comes to you and says, like, you're going to be part of the militia, what are you going to do? Say no? Right. Yeah. You do move. Right. You can't do that in this world. And so all these people are co-opted into this horrible cycle. And that's the problem with Dreads. And this is part of the theme of the movie. It's not obvious. You have to watch it a couple times and you have to listen to this episode and then watch it to see it. Is part of the theme of the movie is that Dredd's concept of justice is flawed because of the trauma that he goes through every day and the way that his sense of humanity has been twisted. He sees everyone that does bad things are bad people. Right. If you do a bad thing, you're a bad person. That's his belief.
And I think that sets us up for that Dredd in a lot of ways. He's either at both times, you love him and you hate him. Yeah. He is the perfect cop and he is the worst cop. Totally. Because you think to yourself, well, yes, somebody's got to go in and clean up the mess. And I see this person who's done something really bad. I want them to get their justice. But then you also see him at the same time. He's abusing I'm sure there's not a lot of civil liberties in this dystopian future of Mega City 1, but you see him just blasting through any sense of propriety that people are individuals. It's both of them at the same time. You love him and you hate him for who he is.
Right. And he's not bad. He's not corrupt in any way. Like he's the opposite of corrupt, right? He is the law. Like the thing is when he says, I am the law, that statement, like the more you learn about Dredd, the more that is true. He only cares about enforcing the law. And so, for example, if someone is innocent, or if he does not believe they are, or he does not have evidence that they are guilty, he will not dispense justice on them. He tries to save the innocent, right? Like early on, when this guy has this woman hostage, right? He waits for an opportunity to shoot him, but he's not going to let that guy get away. So he's willing to put this woman that's held hostage at risk, but he's not willing to shoot through her, right? Because he will not be the one who kills her. He will let people be put at risk in order to do his job. Like he doesn't, like when he's in Peachtree's, like, he knows that Mama is just like mowing down innocent people, and that's not going to stop him because it's not him doing it, right? And so again, it's this ruthlessness to go dispense justice, which he believes is for the good, right? It's to save the people of Peachtree's, all this stuff, and you start to see the flaws in his understanding of humanity come out more and more and more. And I think the most I think at the end, every time I watch this movie, at the end, I love him. And the reason I love him in this iteration is because he's learned to break the rules sometimes. So, for example, right at the beginning, he says losing your primary weapon is an automatic fail, right? And she loses her primary weapon. And that's why she turns in her stuff at the end. And she's like, I failed. I know I failed. But what's interesting is Anderson's transformation is that's the moment where she becomes a badass cop because she knows she failed. So she's not trying to impress Dredd anymore. She's doing it her way. Right. And she finds her way and she really impresses him. And he starts to understand that there are other ways of copping than just killing everyone who seems bad. And it's at the end when he's learned something, that he's willing to break the rules, and he says she's in. And that's the moment you love him, because he starts to find some of his humanity again. And it's because of Anderson's empathy. It's a beautiful story. And it's really a story about Dredd. It's a story about his transformation in the tiniest little way.
Exactly. That is the movie, is that he lives by the law, but even in this dystopian nightmare of a future, there's a lot of ways to interpret the law. He's just that I am the law, but he's really saying that I'm Dredd, and this is the way that I do the law. And you did, to your point, he's learned that maybe the Dredd way isn't the absolute only way, but maybe, like you said also earlier, is that that's how he's gotten through 20 years or whatever of his career, is that he's had this code where when you get those the corrupt judges who show up, they've obviously come up with a very different philosophy to life, that the system has turned them that, you know what, I'll take $1 million or whatever they had said that was offered to kill Dredd. For them, sure, yeah, why not?
Because for them, it doesn't matter. Yeah, they react to the hopelessness of Mega City in this different way, where they're like, look, nothing we do matters. So why? Like, even at like the bad judge even is like, why?
Yeah.
Like, why are you so insistent, you crazy man? Because it is hopeless. And that's also part of what you love about Dredd, is that it doesn't matter to him that it's hopeless, right? You have to do the right thing anyway, even when you can't win. If everyone gave up like that, like maybe the results wouldn't be all that different, but that would be the moment humanity's truly lost. And so even Dredd's like ridiculously merciless and overly black and white approach to the world, like it matters for who we are as people.
And now, a brief word from our sponsors.
It also makes me think of, so you have the ones who go corrupt. You have people like Dredd who are completely black and white. And I'm sure that there were judges who are like, you know, I'm just going to ride my motorcycle, a cool motorcycle around all day and not do anything.
Yeah,
and
no one would know.
Yeah. And I think that we're in a lot of ways, we're seeing that in today's, that the police, at least, I don't know, it could be different in Mega City 1, but they don't have to answer calls. And I'm sure there's plenty of places in Mega City 1 for judges to hide out who don't want to get involved in something like peach trees every single day of their career.
Yeah, I agree. And so that is where, you know, you can see, like, you know, y'all can even hear Steve and me just going like back and forth on Dredd, where we're like, oh, well, he's, you know, he's got a very twisted idea of who people are because he doesn't see people. He only sees their actions. But actually, he's, you know, like, you know, he's actually like the good guy because he keeps fighting for what's right. But his sense of right is twisted, but he never gives up. And like, it's kind of like the bulwark for like what's left, you know, and what's so cool is like, we're so conflicted about this character who is so simple. He's so simple. He's almost not a character. He's almost just a force of nature, but we're so conflicted about him because his choice to be simple and consistent in a world that is this dark challenges us, because we start to ask, like, could we even do that? Right. I couldn't.
No.
Like, you know, who has the fortitude to face that every day, face that hopelessness and face death and face the worst of humanity every day and just keep going? And you admire him for that. And you forgive him for all the ways that he is hard. And then you fall in love with him for the ways that he like finds his, like the little spark of humanity and mercy that are in him. And one of the ways you see that is, at the near the end, when they go up and they meet Domhnall Gleeson. Domhnall Gleeson has been, he's at the top floor with Mama. He's been serving her, and but it's because what she's done is she's like tortured him, and he lives in fear. It's very clear he's just afraid of her. He does what he does to avoid pain. She gouged his eyeballs out and replaced them with cyber eyeballs. He was clearly in pain when it happened because we saw this flashback. So he's a victim. He's a victim, but he's a victim that is breaking the law and contributing to Mama's reign of terror and contributing to the death of people. Right. And so he's a complex. He is complex, at least for Dredd. Like, we're able to see him as just a pure victim here. Like, just get this guy out. But for Dredd, you know, answer number one is, I've seen you break the law. You must be punished, right? Justice is your punishment. And Anderson lets him go, right? Tells him, like, get out of here. Because she, with her psychic vision, is able to see that he's a victim. And again, the psychic part is such an important part of this movie to be able to get the theme across. And one of the ways we see Dredd transform, it isn't just in how he treats Anderson, it's that he trusts her at the end. He doesn't ask her to explain what happened. He doesn't ask her to say, what did you see? He trusts that she saw something that he missed about this person, and that justice was indeed letting this guy go, that this guy was indeed a victim, and freedom is his justice, even though he's done bad things. And the last thing I'll say about her, about the power of Anderson, is she isn't merciful to everyone. So Kay, who's the guy that they've been dragging around this whole time, she gets into his head big time, and she sees, right, he's just a bad guy. Like, he is just, like, in his heart, he's just a terrible person. And so she has no problem killing him. Right. And so, like, she's able to actually judge people. Right. And that's what makes her a great judge, is she's able to judge the human, not just see the action and react by the rule book. It's awesome. Oh.
You can also see that in a way, Dredd is a victim of this society. He's not quite, because he is connected to the society, but obviously he's not the one who screwed things up.
Right.
And he's not the one who underfunded the police department. And he's not the one who's caused this abject misery that people live in. And that kind of makes me think that, like with the drugs, he didn't make the drug laws. If I lived there, I'd probably use slow-mo too. Like slow-mo is the one release that these people have from the misery of their lives. And, you know, you could go down an entire rabbit hole of drug legalization and all this. But for Dredd, it's illegal. When he goes into the drug den or whatever, and he just people pull a gun, he could just starts killing people. And that's just, and I think that's he's the tool of violence for this society. But he's this tip of the spear, but he's not the one who made the rules. He's just enforcing them.
Yeah. And we wonder how much like Dredd, you know, to your point about this Spartan system, how much of him is his like convictions, and how much, and we have to ask this about ourselves all the time. How much of what we do and what we believe is our own convictions that we've come to through our own reason, and how much of it is like our society has hammered this into us. And for Dredd in particular, right, he's been hammered by the judge system. Now, as we know from the corrupt cops, not everyone comes out just as like a brainwashed Terminator, right? That's like Dredd has the inevitability of the Terminator, and he has like the one track mind of the Terminator. And I'm talking about like OG 1980, whatever, Arnold Schwarzenegger Terminator. And like how much of that has, you know, clearly his experience shaped him into that. And yeah, to your point, he is a victim, and Anderson even has compassion for him, and patience with him. A big part of the way that she helps him is by showing by example, right, that things can be different, or that he can relate to the world differently. And you imagine, you know, it's a shame I don't think they're going to make a sequel because it wasn't a box office hit. It was set up for a sequel, right? To have like Dredd and Anderson, you know, buddy cop movie, which would just been like the best. But you know, you can see at the end that like, can you imagine, like, let's imagine like Dredd's life of like just endlessness, and the way that his humanity has retreated into this hole in order for him to psychologically survive. And at the end, like he cares about someone, right? At the end, he like admires someone, and it's Anderson. And he like wants to work with her. He wants to be close to her. Like she gives him something that he's clearly never had. And it's not romantic at all, right? She just happens to be a woman. It is companionship. It's someone who understands him, and someone who basically like through her actions said, "You're okay." I see you, and I see how broken you are, and you are okay. And again, we don't see him display any of that brokenness. It is all through implication, but it's all clearly there. And it's just another part of what makes this movie so good. And you couldn't have done it with Sylvester Stallone, because Sylvester Stallone is like, I'm playing a comic book character. Yeah. Right. And he just went on this like comic book trip. And that's where, you know, it's like Karl Urban's subtlety. So much of what you see, you have to like watch this movie. You just have to watch, and you only see Karl Urban's mouth. Right?
I know, that's amazing.
You never see his full face, and he's just acting with his mouth so well, because all these like subtle changes of how he's frowning. Basically, he just frowns differently. And you can see the judge as a character, you know, Dredd as a character transform through Karl Urban's frowning. I think it's just like one of the coolest acting jobs ever.
I had read somewhere that in the comic book, Dredd never takes his helmet off, and throughout the Judge Dredd with Stallone, he went most of the movie helmetless, where Urban kept apparently in the production, he never took the helmet off. Well, when they were working, he never took, and he sort of method acted it too, where he would never truly get out of character. And I think that that's maybe how he was able to embrace it so thoroughly, is that being behind that helmet. I mean, that helmet was a metaphorical that
you're right. It's a metaphor. Sorry. Yeah. Keep going. Yeah.
He metaphorically, that's what separated him. You know, if nobody can see your eyes, nobody's really seeing who you are.
Right. Yeah. It's that his humanity, the eyes are the window into the soul, right? Like his humanity is hidden not just from others, but like, his like uniform is what he has retreated into. And it's like, as much as he was able to, he has like made himself into the armor. And that armor, we've been talking about the ways that Dredd protects himself. That armor is metaphorical, and Anderson is able to metaphorically pierce the armor and see who he is. What's interesting is we never see in the movie, again, this is all through implication, which is what makes it so good, right? There's no exposition. I hate exposition. There's no exposition in this movie except at the part where, like, at the beginning, he's like, okay, Anderson, here's how crime works here. Great. Got it. Good. Let's go. And then the rest of it is just action. And again, at the first blush, it's just a straightforward, straight shot railroad action movie. But that's just the medium we get to play in. But anyway, we never see, when Anderson is like psychicking other people, we see inside their minds, right? We see flashes of what she's saying. We never see what she sees in Dredd, and we never will. It would be criminal to do it, right? It would have been a big misfire to show any humanity. It'd show any evidence of humanity in Dredd, to show his childhood, to show him being, his parents dying, like whatever thing that would get us to sympathize with him and have evidence of his humanity. It would have been a misfire. The only evidence of his humanity at all is his interaction with Anderson and Anderson's interaction with him. It's awesome.
And that's so cool because she clearly has. She's a psychic. She's seen inside of his head, but they never give that to us. That's really cool.
Exactly. It's just the fact that we know she's a psychic and we know that she respects him. That's all we know. And she never even says it. It's just through her actions that we know that she respects him. And like at the end, you can see just like the disappointment in her eyes when she gives her badge to him because she let him down, right? She feels like she let him down. And after all this time with him, right, she didn't want to let him down. And that tells us who he is under the armor, right? Under the mask, under the frown, or behind the frown. And it's all, And, you can't articulate who he is. You can only know that he is someone that that inspired in this woman with not only empathy, but like absolute, like just badass strength of will and character and fearlessness, right? In this awesome person, he inspired admiration and respect and possibly a form of love in the way that we love Dredd for who he is. And this like desire to, just like he wanted to work with her, she wanted to work with him. She wanted him to respect her. Like she looked up to his character. And and they like both gave, and they both gave each other something through this movie because at the beginning she's not ready, right? And he literally asks her at the beginning, there's like to show her arc, he says, "Are you ready?" And, the first time they're going to use their guns, he says, "Are you ready?" And she just looks at him and he goes, "You don't look ready." And then they have to go in and he does all the shooting. And then the last time they have to use their guns, right? He says, "Are you ready?" She says, "Yeah." And he goes, "You look ready." Right. And so that's her transformation, is that she clearly wants to like do good in the world and like protect the innocent. And she had to survive this meat grinder. She had to become hard. She had to become willing to do violence. She had to learn not to hesitate. And she did hesitate early and almost got them killed. And then she doesn't hesitate late. She's the one she saves Dredd's life after she's ready from, and he's already trusting her because he's like humiliating himself in front of this corrupt cop to buy time because he believes she's going to come get him. And she does. She comes and saves him when he's out of ammo and shot in the gut. Yeah. And he like doesn't even mention it. Right. He's just like, as soon as she saves him, he's just like gets up and keeps going. And he's like back in Terminator mode because it's probably very hard for him to demonstrate that vulnerability. Right. Because he's this very broken person.
And I wonder how much has he become more vulnerable, or he's clearly changed in the narrative arc, that he's in some ways softened up or become more attached to her, and he's very good at training people. I think it shows that there is something of a humanity that you can't really teach someone unless you have some sort of empathy. And he had empathy in there, because if he didn't, he would have just failed her. Yeah. You know, if he really was the pure Terminator, if he was a robot man, he would have failed her. Yeah, she did fail, but he's clearly either that evolved in the movie or he did have that in him somewhere, that, you know, and it probably was some of that. He is fair in his way. He's not corrupt.
Correct.
It's not always it's not fairness. It's absolute equity. It's not, this bad guy had a rough coming up, and so I'm going to give him a break. No, he broke the rules. You're getting the punishment.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter to him. And that's his version of fairness. Yeah. But it's 100%. It's right. Not, there's no inconsistency to it.
Right. Right. In the D&D, alignment, like morality alignment, he's lawful neutral, and Anderson starts out neutral good, and they both move towards lawful good throughout the movie. And that's probably one way of creating this arc. Yeah. His lawful neutrality is just like ridiculous at sometimes, right? There are these like two kids, right? Because like Mama says, like, I'll reward anyone who takes out Dredd, right? And these two kids are like, their parents are probably like starving or something, right? And they're both like, oh God, no, you shoot him. No, you shoot him. Ah! Right. And then like one of them points a gun at him, and he's like 5 years in the juvie ISO cubes. Right. And you're like, oh God, like, can you just like give these kids a slap, right? And a scare, and like send them on their way. And they end up getting away because of other events that distract him. But then also, like, he sees like this guy just like sitting at the door, this vagrant, right? And I think one of the reasons you see that he has a little bit of that mercy in him is early on when they're first entering the building. He says, if I see you again, you're going to the ISO cubes, right? He gives this person a chance to like get out. And then of course he sees the guy again. He's like, okay, ISO cube time. And then the guy gets crushed by the door. But point being, I think like that's where like his lawful neutrality is almost ridiculous. But I think to your point, there's this like little kernel of humanity still in him, and sympathy, right? And I think that's the difference. Is like he has some empathy, like, but there's like the guy is not sympathetic. Like he does not sympathize with like your situation, or like why you ended up pointing a gun at a judge. You pointed a gun at a judge, and like, you need to die now. Yeah. Sorry. Or he doesn't even say sorry. Like he's just like, no, you can't do it. Or you shot at a judge. It's time to die. But yeah, I think that like we see just the ittiest shred of that like mercy in him, that Anderson is able to really bring out of him.
But I wonder what somebody like him does on his off time, because they kind of paint they paint that picture that they're raised in an orphanage. So maybe they do just go back to a barracks and sleep and then get up and go do that again. But then why would those other 4 judges do something to make extra cash? It's clearly to, maybe get their kids a bike or to go move to a better apartment.
That's a great point.
And I think because Judge Dredd is kind of a certain type of cop who's been turned up to 11.
Yeah.
You could picture him that he probably just goes to a bar afterwards and does whatever he can to like turn it off until he has to go put the armor on again tomorrow.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I mean, I'm speaking from my own experience a little bit here. I actually recently decided to stop drinking because I was doing a lot of using alcohol to like obliviate my stress. And so I immediately imagine that. And there's so many like The Wire, for example, right? If y'all have seen The Wire, like going to the bar and getting drunk before going home at night, or like drinking in their car. Like these guys they have problems, right? And they drink it out. And does Dredd go drink? Like it actually seems a little bit in violation of his character, because like he wants to be the perfect cop. And so like, does he just go like work out? Yeah, I can't imagine him having much of a personal life. It's very hard to imagine being able to turn that off and like be a real person in a way that you can have relationships with people. He seems too broken to have real relationships with people. I think that's part of part of why he looked like longingly at Anderson as she walks away. Again, there's no romance at all, but this is someone like he can actually be a partner with and like have a real human relationship with. I think he doesn't have any. I think yeah, he lives very alone, and like, yeah, I could see him like, I'm torn on like whether he's like using the bottle. But I bet if you had to like pin down the comic author, whatever his name is, and say like, what does Dredd do when he's not at work? It's like, he just sits at home and he thinks about being a better cop and he works out a lot, right? Or something like that.
Yeah, he's not the guy who goes back to the locker room and everybody's like he just goes, takes off his stuff and, goes, showers, goes to the locker room. He is not the type who's going to go hang around. And if he does use the bottle, he's not going in carousing with the other cops at the cop bar. He's going to like the dive underneath his apartment building and getting obliterated and going back to his apartment and then going back to work the next day.
Very well said. There's I actually have a little sign because I feel very lonely with my startup sometimes, is that was given to me by my weightlifting trainer of all things. And the sign says, to be world class, you must prepare to be unrelatable. And it's very clear that Judge Dredd is world class, not just in the way that the captain treats him, but even the corrupt cop who shows up. Again, this is a city of 800 million people. So think basically the size of China, right? Or Africa. Is Africa bigger than that? I forget, but whatever, like bigger than all of North America now by a lot, bigger than all of Europe by a lot. So city of 800 million people, like, now these cops, there's some regions to them. So, but still like massive city. And the corrupt cop, who's like the leader of the corrupt cops, he's during his like bad guy monologue, he's like, Judge Dredd ask you for time before he dies. The Judge Dredd, the great legend Judge Dredd. And, and so like, it's clear that Dredd is a legend. And so I think like, it means that the guy is like a different breed. He's like Tom Brady, right? I think like probably Tom Brady is the best example we have here. Like, what does Tom Brady do? Like, Tom Brady goes home and he probably has Tom Brady's just a football machine, right? He's like a football terminator. And so like he has off time, but like he's like getting his muscles massaged and he's eating weird food. He's got his whole like weird food thing and he's working out and he's like studying tape and like, and like he's married to Gisele Bündchen. Like, do they even like go on dates? I don't know. Right. Doesn't seem like they do. In the way that like people like Aaron Rodgers are like out there goofing off and like at Hawaii and you see pictures of that. I think Dredd is like Tom Brady. It's just all business because this has consumed his life entirely in a way that I think it clearly doesn't to all of the judges, but it definitely does him.
And those other judges, they respect him, they admire him, but they do not like him. And right. I think that's probably the Tom Brady. He's not loved, and in many cases he's hated, but he's very much respected because he's at the pinnacle of his career.
Well, he's been at the pinnacle of his career for 20 years is the crazy thing. And and Dredd is probably the same way. It's just like, how does this guy keep it up? Right? How does this guy keep going? And it's because like he's shut off a certain part of himself, right? He is not a balanced individual at all. He's the opposite. He's like Elon Musk, right? Like Elon Musk works like 120 hours a week, right? Think about that, 123 full-time jobs, right? And he's just like, and he just shows no signs of slowing down. And so I think there are like a few people out there who are these legends where we can see the same level of just like totally perverse level of maniacal devotion to one thing. And so we know that it's possible, right? We know that it's a human thing. And actually, I'm really glad we talked about that because it humanizes Dredd even more to know that like there is Tom Brady, there is Elon Musk, there are these people who are just like crazy devoted to the one thing, and that is possible. He's not just a comic book character. He's a character.
The people often around them don't understand that either. Like with Elon Musk, he doesn't understand. I think it was like the CFO had to use the bathroom and Elon Musk was like, you were in there for 7 minutes. The CFO was probably just going in there to get a little bit of a break. Elon Musk doesn't understand that. Judge Dredd doesn't understand. He cannot comprehend that Anderson might think of something a different way, or that those other judges would be corrupt. He cannot comprehend in any way that those people might think differently than the way he has perceived the world.
Yeah. And I think for him, like the one time he gets angry is when he's dealing with the corrupt judges. Like he is mad, right? Because he expects criminals to be bad, right? And it's just business. But when judges are bad, like that threat, I think he's angry, not just because of his code and his like respect, his it's his organization, right? Like these are my people. But I think it also threatens his worldview. It threatens his like the psychological constructs that he's built for himself, and he is like not okay with it. And so like you see him overdo it. Like you see him like crush a guy, not just surgically destroy him. You see him just like crush this guy because of his rage. And I love that too, because that's another, it's not just his empathy, it's his anger that is totally absent in the rest of the film, that shows us that, he cares about something, and there are parts of him that are fragile. Well, we actually spent like way more time on Judge Dredd, on the person Judge Dredd, the character, that I thought we would, because again, he's so simple in so many ways. But I think like what I hope this does for everyone is you watch the movie and you just just sink yourself and like be uncomfortable in the ambiguity of it all, that in this horrible world, like the judges are really horrible things. Like they're basically the Gestapo, right? But what alternative is there? And like, what is worse, right? And you have to ask the same about peace trees. What is worse, Mama or the judges showing up and like kicking the hornet's nest? And like, what does this do to people? What does it do to a society? Is it, would humanity descend in that way in a post-apocalyptic world, like, with a lot of like all this poverty and density and stuff like that? And if so, how should we react? And all that stuff where there's no good answer, right? We want good answers. Like, again, blow up the Death Star, kill the Emperor, right? Great. Republic, we're done. Sorted. Right. You don't have to figure anything else out after that. But in Judge Dredd, there is no answer. And so what do you do to cope? Both as an individual, as we see with Dredd and Anderson, and as a society. And there's like so many ways that can apply to like modern society, like our own issues with like crime and domestic terror and climate change and all these things where it's like, and our own drug problems, right? Because like the opioid crisis and the meth crisis and stuff like that, like how do we cope? And like what is ethical when holding the line for stuff like, I lean libertarian, right? So like I don't like cops having too much power, but like at what point is it irresponsible not to give them tons and tons of power? It's just, I love it. Judge Dredd, if you don't feel like your worldview has been challenged by Judge Dredd, like you need to watch it again after listening to this. That's my thought.